Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to start a vlog, a reading vlog for the weekend. It is mid-month book bash time again. So this is always the second weekend of the month, and we start on a Friday and end on a Monday. This concept was first conceived of by Doris over at Aldi Books, and this is just an opportunity to read more than we normally do, to sort of jumpstart our reading for the month, which is very necessary for me because my October has gotten off to a very slow start. I completed 2 books on October 1st, and then I didn't finish another book until yesterday, which was the 10th. So yeah, it's been very slow going, but mostly because I read so many shorties in September, which was awesome. And now I'm like super into big books. So I've got 4 big books that I'm in the middle of. So let's talk about them. These are the books I'll be reading from this weekend. The first is this book that I've been reading since the summer. This is The Deluge by Stephen Barkley. I am buddy reading this with Shawn Books. And you can see I've got tabs. I've got tabs up here for where I'm got to read this weekend. So this weekend I will be reading starting on page 653 and reading the next section for our check-in on Monday. This is climate fiction, a novel. It's told like in multimedia, and the format is very diverse and really awesome. There's a huge cast of characters, and it's set in the near future, and it describes basically what could happen or probably will happen if we continue to ignore the climate crisis. So yeah, very engrossed by that one. I am also buddy reading this work of nonfiction, The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. This is a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. I'm buddy reading this with my nonfiction buddy readers, Patrice, Karen, and Doris. We have read almost all of Erik Larson's books together, and this is so excellent already. This is literally what happens right before the Battle of Fort Sumter in South Carolina. And of course, he goes into the context around all kinds of things, the society in South Carolina at that time, how a state that was so lightly populated could have been such a fulcrum for the Civil War. Abolitionist, what the abolitionists were up to at that time, what Abraham Lincoln was up to at that time, like just all of the context. And it's just, again, engrossing. I love how Erik Larson writes nonfiction. So that one's fun, and I'll be continuing on with that. My third buddy read is Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. This is my classic that I'm reading for Victober. This is, again, a huge book, and I am buddy reading this with Kim from Middle of the Book March and Britta, and I am on page 218, and I need to read to page 267 for a check-in this weekend. So I'm almost there. I'm getting there. I had to read 15 chapters this week, and I have been making a good progress, reading a couple chapters a day. And this is way funnier than I thought it was going to be. For some reason in my brain, I had mixed up Vanity Fair and Dangerous Liaisons, which they're nothing alike, I assume, because I expected this book to be very serious and very formal, and it is not. It is satire, and it is very amusing, and we're following these 2 young ladies. Amelia's story, she's the quote-unquote good one, and Becky, quote-unquote, is the bad one, and we're following these 2 young ladies as they attempt to make their way in adult society, and I am just really getting a kick out of this one. It reminds me of like a mixture of Anthony Trollope and Jane Austen and George Eliot, so loving this. And then last but not least, my 4th chunky book is my biography of FDR. This is by Gene Edward Smith, and this is really excellent. I am about halfway through it. I'm on page 426, so you can see where I'm at. I've been tabbing every time the book talks about Campobello Island because that's up here where I live, and FDR, such a fascinating person. Like, this is a really excellently written biography, and really shows the nuances of FDR's character, and also like again, another president where I'm like, it must have been terribly, terribly difficult to be married to this man. And, you know, I admire Eleanor Roosevelt so much. Like, she's one of my heroes. And so reading about the ways that FDR treated her is very enraging to me. And because FDR, I've always considered, you know, one of the best presidents of the United States. And, you know, of course, the New Deal and all the things that he did to start things like Social Security and other benefits to society. But he definitely had his flaws as well. He definitely had his flaws. And it's interesting because the book, you know, does not just give him the hero treatment. It talks about the ways in which he made mistakes and missteps that he made politically. And he was a very gifted politician, really, really gifted at politics and how to play the game. But he definitely made some missteps along the way. So very much enjoying that as well. So those are the 4 books that I currently have on the go. I may start something smaller and lighter to like mix in amongst these larger, heavier reads this weekend, but I may not. I'm not sure. I should have quite a bit of reading time because my husband leaves tomorrow for a moose hunt and he's going to be gone for a whole week. So that is going to free up a lot of my time. And I do have a couple of social commitments over the weekend, but it's a long weekend as well. So I have Monday off from work. So I feel like I have a lot of reading time ahead of me for this weekend, so I hope to come back to you soon with some updates for where I get to. It's Sunday, October 13th, and I've made some tremendous progress in my reading, so I want to tell you about it. First of all, I completed my reading of the section that I need to read to check in with Britta and Kim on Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. I was supposed to read through chapter 25 for check-in this weekend, which I have read that. So I've read up to page 268 in this edition. And I will say that this is it's an interesting edition because it starts when the book starts, the page number starts on like page 14 or something like that. Like it doesn't start on page 1 for some reason. I don't know. It must start, page 1 must be the actual cover page. This is not an expensive version of this, but I do like it because the font size is not small. So for a classic, especially a classic of this length, like the font size is super important to me. Vanity Fair so far, I'm really enjoying. It's very humorous. The author is definitely poking fun at society and sort of this idea that some people are better than others because of their position in that society, and whether or not if you have money, that actually makes you equal to people who have, status because of their birth, or if people who have, were born highborn into the aristocracy are somehow better than people just because of their birth, and even if they're poor. So I appreciate all of that. It's very typical themes to be exploring in Victorian literature, but I think that this book is doing a very good job. So I'm not really sure where this is gonna go. Like I'm a third of the way through the book, and our two main characters are these two young women, Becky and Amelia, very different temperaments, very different backgrounds, but both sort of in a similar situation in their romantic situation. I don't want to go into anything I don't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't read it. So they've sort of gotten themselves embroiled in these romantic attachments that are very similar in some ways, but very different in others. And their outlooks on how to deal with the hardships that they're faced with are very different. So that I'm enjoying those comparisons in this book. So that's where I'm at with that one. I also read to the end of part 1 in Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson, which is a buddy read with Doris, Patrice, and Karen. And I just love how Erik Larson puts together these history nonfiction books, because the topic ostensibly is about the battle for Fort Sumter that started the Civil War, but he is delving into, the society in the South in this time period in the 1800s, the early 1800s, where there was this chivalry and these people, like, it's very similar to the Victorian lifestyle where these people thought, they owned these plantations and they were in the society. And if you were born into certain families and you had certain amounts of money, like, you could lord it over everyone else, and you dressed a certain way and you acted a certain way and all that. So it's like very similar things happening. But politically, what's happening between, the great divisions between the North and the South in the United States in that time period, it just so much reflects what's happening in current political times in the United States. Like, he's drawing comparisons, but not doing it like overtly, but you can just, as you're reading it, you're like, oh, like the same thing is happening today. So I'm finding that very interesting. Plus all the contextual stuff that he adds in about society at the time period. So interesting. And I've also read a few more chapters of my biography of FDR. So I'm currently on page 480 with this, chapter 22. We are in FDR's third term. He has just been elected to his third term to be president. It is the start of World War II. The United States has not yet joined the fight. In fact, FDR had campaigned on, I'm not going to send your sons to war in Europe, basically, with the caveat of unless we're attacked. That was the out, right? But in the meantime, the United States is providing all material assistance that they can to the British as they fight against the Axis powers. And that was not, like, the majority of the population supported that, but the politicians, there were very many isolationist politicians at the time period. So that's very interesting to read about. Just read about how selective service was instituted in the United States. It was instituted in 1940 at the start, or 1941 at the start of FDR's third term. And that was a big political fight. Like, were we going to make all young men sign up for the possibility to be drafted into the military? Really interesting background. And like I said, FDR was a very complex person, very gifted politician, but he didn't always make the right calls. And so I think it's interesting to read a book like this because FDR is quite revered in American history, but it's interesting to read a book that talks about his flaws as well as his positive attributes. So I am very much enjoying that one as well. And then because I've had a lot of time to read this weekend, last night before bed, I picked up a book that I thought would be a cozy read. And this is a brand new book that I haven't shown yet on the channel. I just bought this last weekend. Yeah, last weekend I bought this for my birthday. I gifted this to myself. This is The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. I heard about this from two of my favorite booktubers. Amy over at Zoe Beck read this recently and talked about it and liked it. And then Kim over at Middle of the Book March read it and raved about it. And I'm so delighted that I picked this book up. First of all, beautiful purple sprayed edges. This cover is delightful. It is a chocolate brown book with purple text on the spine. Chocolate brown is like my favorite color. So, and also all of the chapters start with this little illustration of raspberries because raspberries play a big role in the story, which raspberries are my favorite berry. They are the premium berry. I am a Maine girl, and blueberries are the main fruit that we grow in my state, but raspberries are head and shoulders above blueberries in my opinion. Anyway, information you didn't need to know, nor did you ask, but I just thought I'd share. So this is cozy fantasy. This is low stakes. You can go into this assured that, nothing really bad is going to happen. And it is just a delight. So we're following our main character. I've already forgotten her name, even though I read it all in like a couple hours. Keela. Keela is a librarian in the capital city of this empire. And there's a coup. There's a revolution. The empire is overthrown by the revolutionaries, and in the process of gaining power, they light everything on fire, including the library that Kira works in. And so she flees with her talking spider plant and 5 crates of books of spells in a little boat, and flees to her home island, the island that she was born at and hasn't been back to since she was 9 years old. And decides she's just going to hide out there, right? She's an introvert. She didn't have any friends other than this talking spider plant, and she just wants to be left alone. So she shows up on her island and goes to her little cottage that had belonged to her family, and like proceeds to try to set up this life for herself. But in the meantime, she realized, like, how am I going to support myself? I don't have any money, and there's not going to be enough time for me to like grow a vegetable garden or anything like that before I starve to death. So she comes up with this plan to use some of the spells in the books that she has taken from the library. And even though it's illegal to use the spells, because spells are only for the elite in this society, she's going to use these spells and make, to grow berries basically and make jam. And she's going to sell jam or trade jam, barter jam. And that's how she's going to survive. And in the meantime, she meets all these characters from this island. Her neighbor is very nosy and intrusive, and he just keeps wanting to help. And she's very distrustful of him, but he is just genuinely a good guy and just genuinely wants to help. There are seahorses, there are mer people, there are flying cats, there are centaurs and other magical beings. And it's just lovely, and it's about found family and friendship and trusting people and playing to your strengths and not always assuming the worst of people and allowing people to be the best that they can be. And it's just cozy and delightful, and it's all about like loving books and research and like the scholarly life, and like this, it's just so many lovely moments in this book, and it's very cozy and very fantastical, and not very much happens, and it's so satisfying. And like I said, I started reading this about 7:00 last night, and I finished reading it at about 9:00 this morning. I did sleep in between times there, but yeah, I just enjoyed my time spent with this so much. And I'm so grateful to the booktubers that I named, Amy and Kim, for talking about this, because I never would have heard of this book otherwise. And I'm so pleased I purchased this one and read it already. I didn't leave it moldering on my TBR pile for a whole year or something. So very thrilled with that. So that's what I've been up to. I have one more day left of mid-month book bash, and it is a day off from work. Like, so excited about that. So I don't know what else I'm going to read. I'm going to continue plugging away at my buddy reads. I do need to read my section of The Deluge by Stephen Barkley for check-in with Shawn over at Shawn Breathes Books tomorrow. So that will be my priority for the rest of the day. It's only not even 1:00 in the afternoon. So yeah, good times ahead for me. Hello, it is Sunday. No, it is not Sunday. It is Monday. evening. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. And I have had a lovely, lovely day. We went out to lunch with my daughter and my mom, and I've been reading and I've been cooking, and it's just been a very relaxing and lovely day, even though it's been absolutely raining like cats and dogs outside. But that's all right. We needed the rain. So let's talk about what reading I've gotten done. I read my section in the Deluge by Barkley, which is a buddy read with Shawn books. We've been working on this since this past summer. We read about 50 or 60 pages a week. And I would highly recommend, this is a chunker of a book, I would highly recommend reading it at that pace because there's so much going on and there are so many characters in this novel that it will give you time to like digest what is happening if you read it slowly. I would normally gulp a book like this down and then not remember half of it or miss half of the connections that are being made. And I appreciate so much a slow buddy read for a big book like this that has a lot going on. This is climate fiction, and each chapter is told from a different character's perspective, and you don't know at the beginning how all the characters are connected. And it's starting to become more obvious. I read up to page 712, and it's almost 900 pages long, this book. So last 200 pages to go. Things are starting to come together. The connections are starting to be made. This takes place starting in like 2014 and goes through the near future. So we're now in like 2036. And this is an imagining of what happens to the world if the climate crisis continues to be ignored. Just this, as Stephen King says somewhere in here, he has an endorsement, a blurb, and he says, basically, it's scary because it's real. And I endorse that blurb very much. I've also continued to read in my presidential biography, FDR, by Gene Edward Smith. Continue to find this really, really fascinating. I am on page 506 in this tome. I'm having a hard time with my words this evening. I have a headache, and as sometimes happens when I have a headache, I lose my words. So just bear with me, if you will. I want to get this clip filmed before the light 100% goes away. It's 5:30 and the light's already going. You know, fall in New England. If you know, you know about the light. Anyway, I started this book today, Valley of the Birdtail, an Indian Reserve, a White Town, and the Road to Reconciliation by Andrew Stobo Sniderman and Douglas Sanderson. And this is a book that I first heard talked about on Shawn Books channel. He had the authors on for an interview, and I've been wanting to read it. And I just started this as a buddy read with my friend Rachel. And read the first 50 pages or so. This is so good. It details the story of this community in Canada now I've forgotten what part of Canada, but up in northern Canada, where there's basically an Indian reserve and a white town. The Indian reserve is so small that it only has a K through 8 elementary school. And so when kids get into the teenage years and they need to go to high school, they have to go into the white community to go to high school. And so we're following a young woman, teenager who is Anishinaabe, and she has to go to high school in this white community and what that's like for her. And then we're also getting like her family background. We're getting other members of the white community, their background. And it goes back to tell the story of when folks from the reservation were removed and sent to residential schools and how that has impacted the modern community members, because I think it's 2008 when we're following this teenage girl who's attending high school in a white community. And so it's all about, you know, how these two communities interact with each other, what role the residential schools and the history of that plays in modern times with the actual members of both communities right now. The last book that Rachel and I read together was Seven Fallen Feathers, which was a book about kids being brought from remote Indian reserves to go to high school in white communities, and 7 young members, young high school people have died in unusual or unknown circumstances. And this book sort of dovetails with that same theme of removing Indian kids from their communities and sending them off to these urban areas or these white communities to go to school, and what that means for them and what they have to endure, and, you know, all of that stuff, and the past and how that plays into the present. And so I'm very interested to continue reading this one, nonfiction, obviously, and I think it's going to be a really heartbreaking but also important read. And then to lighten it up a bit, because I felt like I needed something a bit lighter after all that, I started this mystery novel, The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This is One Murder, 15 Suspects, Can You Uncover the Truth? And this is a mystery novel. Janice Hallett is like very popular, and I'm late to the party, but this one is one I picked up when I was in New York City with Doris, and it is told in emails and text messages and things like that. And the whole story is there's this community theater group. The principal, like the director and the leading lady, his wife, their granddaughter gets diagnosed with a very rare form of brain cancer. And so they start this whole fundraising appeal to like raise money for a very experimental treatment. In the meantime, this play is being put on with these community actors, and there's lots of tension, and there's lots of like class differences and like different personalities. And you're trying to figure out what's going on and who's connected with who. And I am 172 pages into this, and the murder has not happened yet. So at some point, somebody's going to get murdered, and then the story's going to go on. But right now, we're still like figuring out through these emails and these texts, you're figuring out the characters and who's who. And it's like such a fun ride. It is so fun. And it is, you know, really light, and compared to the other things that I'm reading, it's like a breeze to get through. So I'm glad that I have this one in the mix of what I'm reading right now. So that's my update. I probably will have one more brief check-in before I close out the vlog, just because it is only 5:30, and because my husband is still away on the moose hunt, I am probably going to read for the rest of the evening. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I'm here to wrap up the end of the mid-month Book Bash vlog by telling you that I completed another book. I stayed up past my bedtime last night, and I finished The Appeal by Janice Hallett. This is a mystery novel told in email messages and text messages and letters and that sort of thing. So there's very little or none of like regular prose. It's either reports, emails, text messages, that sort of thing. And I love a good multimedia told story. And this was a really fun time. I figured out some things about the mystery, which is fairly unusual for me, but I did not figure out who done it. So good on the author for fooling me on that one. I gave a little summary of what this book was about in the previous clip, so I won't go into that particular detail, but I will say that this is, you know, there's quite a large cast of characters, but the book very helpfully includes a list of who all the main people are, so you can flip back and forth to that to help you until you get sort of used to who's who. But this is really about, you know, ostensibly it's about this community theater group and a murder that happens within this group, but it's really about class differences and the kind of influence a particularly wealthy family can have on a small community, and how people sort of curry favor and look the other way with the sort of alpha group in their community. So that was quite interesting, and it's interesting to see, you know, who's on the outside and who's on the inside, and how those relationships remain in flux, and like trying to figure out who was, you know, not what they seemed was really fun. And particularly because you have all this correspondence. So you're trying to figure out like who's lying, but who's being straightforward. Lots of really interesting twists and turns throughout. And it's sort of framed, the story itself is framed as there's this law professor and he has these two associates, or he's not a law professor, a lawyer in a law firm. And he has these two younger associates, and he asks these younger associates to take a look through all this material, this case that's already, you know, gone to trial, and see if they can figure out what everyone else has missed in this case. And so those two individuals are communicating back and forth as they go through all of these documents. And they're trying to figure out who, you know, what's happened and how this all fits together. And it's a great frame. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So yeah, fun times with this. Really successful mid-month book bash. Like, read so much this weekend. Probably the most successful mid-month book bash of the year so far, which is fabulous. And now it's time to start the work week off. So I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I'll talk to you later.